Hi, I am Mrs. Sloan, and this is a video intended for AP Biology. And this is video 2, chapter 16, part 2. In part 1, we discussed population genetics and Hardy-Weinberg and the conditions you need to maintain. Here in video 2, we're just going to have a little special emphasis on natural selection. If you are new to my videos, down in the descriptor of this video, you will see a link to this presentation I'm giving right now, and it contains notes, and it's 2 columns. First column is scaffolding of the notes. I'll help you fill it in. Second column, please put in pictures and images that help you. So let me tell you what we're going to talk about in this video in part 2. We're going to talk about the different types of selection: stabilizing, directional, disruptive, and sexual selection. We're going to talk about why we aren't perfect, and then finish up with the heterozygote advantage. So here we go. Quick review. If we're going to compare and contrast, I need a pointer. Here we go. Lamarck and Darwin, and we'll focus here on giraffes. So here you can see, dead giraffes. If there's dead giraffes involved, then it's got to be Darwin, because some are living and some are dying. Remember, who's going to be the one that survives? Who's going to have the best fitness and ability to pass on their genes? Those with the best adaptations for their environment. Lamarck also gave a mechanism, but his mechanism was incorrect. He worked with use and disuse. If you used it, you kept it. If you didn't use it, you would lose it. And over your lifetime, that you would acquire characteristics that you would pass on to your offspring. So that was not the right mechanism. Natural selection says, what Darwin would say is, there's an overproduction. There's more giraffes generated that can actually survive in that environment, and that they have inherited variations. These are some interesting variations. Some of those variations would increase your fitness, make you more likely to pass on to your offspring successfully, like a longer neck. And so those are the ones that reproduced and were successful in that, survived and thrived, and that you have vast amounts of time that would select for that longer neck. Today, what I want to talk about is what are the different categories of selection. So the first one we want to talk about is stabilizing selection. And that sounds exactly like what you would anticipate. You in all of these graphs that I'm going to show you today, you will see a curve. And that's because many traits are polygenic. Remember, when we learned Mendelian and genetics, we would say, okay, big T is tall. Big T is still tall, little t is short. So it's like tall, short. But most of our traits are polygenic. That means there are multiple genes that are contributing to that trait. So that's why you see this curve, all right? So stabilizing selection is you are selecting for that intermediate. You don't want to be too tall, you don't want to be too short, you want to be just right, the Goldilocks arena. So the intermediate phenotype is most adaptive, and the extremes are selected against over time. So for instance, for birds, you don't want to have too many eggs, you don't want to have too few eggs, it's got to be just right. Birth weight, you do not want to give birth to a giant, but yet it's not adaptive to be too small either, so it's just right. So on your notes, you have this on stabilizing, so you just needed to add the words extremes are selected against. Now I want to ask you this. Do you think this would lead to speciation, forming a new species? What do you think, yes or no? And I'm going to tell you no, right? Because you're not going for one or another. You're just trying to keep the norm. So stabilizing selection would not lead to a new species. How about this though? Directional selection. So in directional selection, you are picking one extreme over the other. So an extreme phenotype is favored. It shifts in one direction, so over time then this would lead to speciation, a difference. An example is the horse body over time, and we've looked at that the horses got larger and larger. Why? Because their environment changed. They weren't in a forested ecosystem, they were in the plains or grasslands, and it was better to be bigger and taller and stronger in order to survive. We do a lot of directional selection with our crops, right? Early apples, ancestral apples, were small and not as sweet. right? But we have selected for bigger and bigger apples with more and more sugar in them because that's what sells, because as a society, we are addicted to sugar, right? So that would be a form of directional selection. So on your notes, you just need to have an extreme phenotype is favored, and it can lead to speciation. Okay, disruptive selection, okay, sounds just like it. It's one or the other. It's not a single extreme. It is both of the extremes are selected. So two or more extremes are favored. So it's better to be a really dark snail or a really light snail, but not in between. So again, this could be, because if you had one species, right, and then you select the extreme, you could get two species. So that too leads to speciation. And also another example of that is gamete size, right? The female, remember, you have unequal cytokinesis when you do oogenesis and form eggs in meiosis. So you have one large egg and then two or three little polar bodies, whereas sperm, they are much, much smaller, right? Because they're members of the fallopian swim team and they're trying to get fast and be there first. So that would be an example of disruptive. So you need to have intermediate selected against and leads to speciation. Okay, another type of selection, which will also come up in our behavioral unit, is sexual selection. Now, when you first see this picture, I understand you might be offended. I hope you're not. I hope you understand what I'm getting here. Because the female, okay, in a binary world, the female has one large egg, and she only has one egg that is viable a month. So she is looking for love. She is looking for support. She is looking for someone that will care for her when she's vulnerable, right? When she's giving birth. It doesn't matter, if you're a bear or a human in this situation, you might be looking for that partner. Actually, bears might be bad examples. Okay, anyway, so you're looking for that partner. Whereas the male is just about the act of reproduction. And I'm not saying that that's okay or the right thing to do, but remember, they don't have one sperm. They have millions of sperm. If you were a male, in the course of this video, you have made over 5 million sperm so far. So for your increased fitness, you might try to get as much sperm out there as possible, whereas the female, we'll look at the biology behind that, why she is going for quality over quantity. And that is all part of sexual selection. And these are changes that occur to increase the chances of finding a mate, So intersexual selection, that's the first one on your notes there. And this has a lot to do with female choice and which male would be the best choice for her. So let's look at a couple of hypotheses for that. I'm right in the way. Sorry. There we go. Couple hypotheses for that. Two hypotheses. The first one, good gene hypothesis. And this is that does the male have traits to improve the survival of or the fitness of your offspring, right? Are they bigger? Are they stronger? Are they faster? Okay, that would be good gene hypothesis. The runaway hypothesis is like you're running away with a certain trait, like you see here on the peacock, right? So it's all about looks. Now, there could be more to that, right? Because he could have these bright colors, and that means he's very healthy because of his good coloration. Or it could actually mean that he has good genes, because if he's this brightly colored and he is able to survive and get away from predators, maybe he has a good gene. So it could be a combination of both. So for your notes, the good gene hypothesis, choose a mate with traits that increase survival. Okay. And then for runaway hypothesis, choose a mate based on appearance. So in human terms, if you're based on appearance, that might be how good looking or handsome you are. In human terms, for good gene hypothesis, it might be somebody who has some money because they can protect and support you and support your offspring and help put them in good schools. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just trying to make an analogy there for you. Okay. Now, this also points out, especially with the peacocks, is sexual dimorphism. And this is where the males and the females look markedly different. And in my class, we'll be watching several different videos, especially with birds. You can really see that. But look right here at the pheasant. Look at her coloration and look at his coloration, right? They serve two different purposes. Think about this. He's trying to attract a mate be beautiful. Look at me, I'd be a great mate. She does not have that coloration. Why might that be adaptive? Can you think? Right? If she's in charge of the eggs, she wants to hide. So she doesn't want to stand out. She doesn't want to have any bright colors, right? That would not be a good adaptation. And those females who had bright colors, probably their nests are more likely to get disrupted by a predator. Where if you blend in, you're not as obvious, right? That would be better. Also, males, a lot of times bigger and stronger because they might be competing with other males to try to get your attention. And so that will lead us to intrasexual selection. So let's take a look there. Oh, sorry. In my class, we'll be watching I encourage you, look at bird videos and bird dances. There's some great videos there, and we'll be watching some of these in my class. And this is the bowerbird. The bowerbird creates a backdrop and does things. It might collect, in this case, it's collecting blue things. And so he's saying, look at all my blue things, and I've artfully arranged them. Don't you want to mate with me? Others do these very intricate dances. And so anyway, there's some good videos out there for that. All right, so on sexual selection, which leads to sexual dimorphism differences, here are the two. In intersexual selection, this is Betty going to choose Joe or is Betty going to choose Jim? Okay, that's intersexual selection. And those are those two hypotheses that we talked about. Good gene hypothesis, is she looking out for fitness of her offspring, or runaway hypothesis, how colorful, how bright the appearance is. Intra, it means within, right? So this would be Joe competing with Jim. You know, who's better? These would be fights that they might have or dances they might do to compete, right? So this is a good graphic to pause here and pop in your notes for intra and intersexual selection. So going off of this, here we go. Here you can see some fighting, intra, within. Males make more gametes, so they should compete to inseminate. They all have all these gametes, and they want to be the winner, and they will compete to inseminate. So they have to do the cost-benefit analysis. If you're going to be like throwing your neck around like these giraffes and fighting, is it worth it, right? So all these male competitions, you don't want to fight so much. If this is like number one in the herd and this guy over here is number two, if they fight so much and they're so bloodied up by their fight that neither one of them gets to have sex and number three over here who just watched them fight gets all the ladies, that was probably not a good cost-benefit analysis. You're not more likely to pass on your genes. Here on when you are dominant, yes, you have more access to females, more likely to reproduce, and this is all established by rankings and confrontations, but there are drawbacks to being the largest male, to being top dog. You're larger, so you have to have access to more food, and you're putting yourself in danger too. So that's all part of the cost-benefit analysis. So dominance hierarchies, a higher ranking animal has greater access, that's the word you need, to resources than a lower ranking. And these lead also not just to food, but territories. So a territory is an area defended against competitors, an area defended against competitors. Territoriality is a defensive behavior needed to defend a territory. You could use displays and sounds and calls or urine. And we're going to touch back into this when we talk about behavior in Unit 8. All right, next. So maintenance of variations. How is it that we maintain all of this variety? Well, there's a couple things we want to talk about for that, all right? So, but first, let me address this. I think I have it a little bit out of order here. So this is just a summary slide I popped in here. This is kind of foreshadowing to Unit 8. I wanted to say the biology, males produce many sperm and they compete. So that's intrasexual selection. What kind of behavior does this lead to? Dominance hierarchies and territoriality. Females produce few eggs, so it's better to be selective with the few eggs you make, and that leads to intersexual selection. Will I choose Joe or Jim? And there are two hypotheses for that choice, good gene and runaway. Okay, all right, so little sidetrack there. So we have already talked about, remember I'm talking about maintenance of diversity. We've already talked about how you can get variations, right? You can get variations through mutations. That's one way. Gene flow, somebody can bring in new genes to your group. In any kind of natural selection that is disruptive or directional, right? Disruptive leading to two differences, or directional in one direction. Those are some ways that you are keeping and maintaining your variety. Now, why doesn't, and this is the next in your notes, why doesn't natural selection produce these perfect organisms then? And selection can only edit, that's the word you need in your notes, existing variation. So whatever you have, it can just edit that. And evolution is limited by your historical constraints, meaning, like, where did you come from? My arms cannot just start spontaneously becoming wings, right? What is my phylogeny? Who did I evolve from? And then here is just a subnote on how we get those variations and maintain them. Yes, we need to look where we came from, but we have subpopulations that could be a reservoir for new traits for us still, right? Subpopulations or adaptations within that trait. And then all of our adaptations are often compromises, meaning, yes, you're standing upright, you're upright man, but you don't have the support of all four legs. So as a result of that, you could have lower back issues. And so it's a trade-off. Remember that cost-benefit analysis? Yes, I want to be upright because I can see more around, I'm taller, but it comes with the compromise of having a bad back. And remember, chance is still a part of it all, along with natural selection and with the environment. So that's why we don't produce those perfect organisms. All right. So again, I just want to reiterate, okay, talking about how we, let me go back to, okay, how we maintain those variations. Okay. These are ways we can maintain variations, right? We also have subpopulations that could be a reservoir for variations. And then here, heterozygote advantage. Let me explain this. So remember when we studied population genetics, we would look at allele frequencies in the gene pool. So if everybody took their two alleles and threw them in the gene pool, and we looked at the frequency of the dominant allele versus the recessive allele, remember P and Q? Right? So if your Q or recessive allele is 0.9, right, then your dominant allele, right, would be 0.1, and vice versa. If it was only 0.1, then the dominant allele would have to be 0.9. Knowing that, right, look right here. When the recessive allele is at 90% of your gene pool, yes, 81% of your population will be homozygous recessive, right? Q squared. But look at your heterozygotes. 2 times P times Q, right? That would be 2 times 0.9 times 0.1 is 18% of your population is a heterozygote. If you flip it, right, and now the Q or little a allele is only 0.1, now the homozygous dominants are going to be 81%. That's a big change, right? But look at the heterozygote, still exactly the same allele frequency. Remember, traits have to be expressed in the phenotype to be selected, and heterozygotes can shelter alleles. And that could also lead to different variations, yes. But on your notes, what we're going to talk about is how sometimes these heterozygotes have an advantage to be a heterozygote, which then maintains the allele frequency of the recessive allele a little bit higher than what you would expect. So one of those examples of that is sickle cell disease. If you are normal, so both your alleles are HBA, then you will not have sickle cell disease. If, however, you get bitten by a mosquito, you are more likely to die of malaria, right? And if you do have, let's go to the other extreme, if you have 2 sickle cell alleles, you will have sickle cell disease and you will die earlier due to that sickle cell disease. But if you are a heterozygote, okay, you will not, you're carrying the allele, but you will not express that in your phenotype. You will not die of sickle cell disease. And because you're a carrier, you're more resistant to malaria. So this is what's called heterozygote superiority. It's better to be a heterozygote than homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. Now, this on your, let's see, define the heterozygote is favored over the 2 homozygotes. And if you look at sickle cell disease, I gave you everything in the notes for that. If you are normal, you can become sick from malaria is what you want to put in there. And then another example is cystic fibrosis. If you're a carrier for cystic fibrosis, you're more resistant to typhoid fever, more resistant to typhoid fever. So this is an example of pleiotropy, and I know we talked about it back in genetics, but I popped in a definition right here in case you're forgetting. And this is when you have this one gene, but it influences two or more seemingly unrelated phenotypic traits. And so you have multiple phenotypic expressions. So one of your phenotypic expressions, if you're a carrier, is that you're more resistant to malaria. All right, now, there in this presentation, I put in a whole slew of practice problems for part 1 about population genetics. So I just wanted to show you those as well. And if you are, so it's in the presentation in the link that you see in the descriptor below. And if you are one of my students, I'll see you in class.